And I saw him one night reading the Bible. And I thought, okay, this will be fun. Let's take down another Christian. Be amusing. And so I looked at my friend, his name was David. I said, David, do you realize that book you're reading is not trustworthy? It's been corrupted over time. And he's reading his Bible and he closes it and he says, go on. Which should have been a sign for me that this wasn't going to go my way, but I just kept going. And I said, David, Jesus spoke Aramaic, did he not? And then the earliest church was in Palestine, it was in Jerusalem, it was in Israel, so they must have spoken Hebrew. But by the time the New Testament's written, it's written in Greek. So you have a translation of Jesus' words before it's ever written down. And then the New Testament that lasted the longest period of time in the church was not actually in Greek, it was in Latin. So you have another translation, then it's in Latin for 1,000 years before it comes into German, and from German it goes into English, and that's where we get the KJV. It's a translation of a translation of a translation of a translation of a translation, which is why you have the KJV, the NIV, the ESV, the NASV, the who knows what V. You got so many versions of the Bible, how can I know which one's actually the Word of God? Now that had worked on many Christians, and I was ready for him to crumple under the weight of my argumentation. But David looked at me and he said,
some men inherit faith, others defend it. Very few are willing to lose everything for what they believe is true. This is the Nabeel Qureshi story, a young Muslim apologist deeply devoted to Islam, who began a search for truth that would cost him everything. Born into a devout Pakistani Muslim family, Nabeel was raised where faith was not merely practiced. It was identity, honor, family. He loved Islam, studied it deeply, believed it completely. From an early age, he was trained to defend Islam intellectually, the Quran, Hadith, Islamic history. He learned not only what Muslims believe, but how to argue for it. He was sharp, very sharp. If you debated him, you had to come prepared. Nabeel would say things like, the Bible has been corrupted. Jesus never claimed to be God. Islam is the final revelation. He wasn't searching for another faith. He believed he had already found the truth. Then came an unexpected friendship with a young Christian named David Wood. They argued constantly. Christianity, Islam, history, the resurrection, the Quran, everything. But over time, it stopped becoming about winning. It became about truth. For years, the two men challenged each other relentlessly, one defending Islam, the other defending Christianity, neither willing to compromise. The deeper Nabeel investigated, the more difficult the questions became. The debate slowly became personal, not merely which religion is comforting, but which religion is true. What if Christianity is true? But truth came with consequences. If Christianity were true, he could lose everything. For Nabeel, conversion was not merely changing beliefs. It meant risking family bonds, cultural identity, community, everything he had ever known. People don't understand the cost. This wasn't casual. He loved his family deeply. God, guide me, even if it costs me everything, he retorts. Nabeel later spoke about dreams, spiritual experiences, and moments that deeply impacted him. But ultimately, he said his decision rested on truth. I had to ask myself, was I willing to follow the evidence, wherever it led? After years of struggle, investigation, prayer, and fear, Nabeel Qureshi made his decision. His baptism was more than ceremony. It was a public declaration, a crossing, an irreversible step. Baptized in 2005, his friend David Wood recently uploaded the baptized video clip, which again is a remainder of the brave choice Nabeel made in following Jesus for the rest of his life. The young Muslim apologist became one of Christianity's most recognizable voices engaging Islam. His story felt real, not hateful, not arrogant, just honest. Nabeel spoke about Muslims with compassion. He criticized ideas without dehumanizing people. Then, at the height of his influence, came devastating news. Stage 4 stomach cancer. It shocked everybody. He was young, brilliant, full of life. But even in suffering, Nabeel remained strikingly transparent. He spoke openly about pain, fear, hope, faith, and unanswered questions. The purpose of life is not comfort, it is truth. Nabeel died in 2017. but his voice continues to echo across classrooms, churches, debates, and conversations around the world. If truth doesn't exist, then it would be true that truth doesn't exist. And once again, we arrive at truth. There is no alternative. Truth must exist. Nabeel Qureshi.
And I saw him one night reading the Bible. And I thought, okay, this will be fun. Let's take down another Christian. It'll be amusing. And so I look at my friend, his name was David. I said, David, do you realize that book you're reading is not trustworthy? It's been corrupted over time. And he's reading his Bible and he closes it and he says, go on. Which should have been a sign for me that this wasn't going to go my way, but I just kept going. And I said, David, Jesus spoke Aramaic, did he not? And the earliest church was in Palestine, it was in Jerusalem, it was in Israel, so they must have spoken Hebrew. But by the time the New Testament's written, it's written in Greek. So you have a translation of Jesus' words before it's ever written down. And then the New Testament that lasted the longest period of time in the church was not actually in Greek, it was in Latin. So you have another translation, then it's in Latin for 1,000 years before it comes into German, and from German it goes into English, and that's where we get the KJV. It's a translation of a translation of a translation of a translation of a translation, which is why you have the KJV, the NIV, the ESV, the NASB, the who knows what V. You got so many versions of the Bible, how can I know which one's actually the Word of God? Now that had worked on many Christians, and I was ready for him to crumple under the weight of my argumentation. But David looked at me and he said, Nabeel, let me ask you a question. Just a few minutes ago, I heard you speaking to your mom on the phone. Was that in English? I said, no. And he said, but when you told me what she said, you told me in English. Was that a corrupted translation? No. He said, Nabeel, when you are multilingual, you can take a message that's given in one language and accurately translate that message into another language, and you've preserved the message. And that's exactly what the disciples did. They're able to listen to Jesus, whatever language Jesus spoke, and write it in Greek. And of that Greek New Testament manuscript, we have in our possession over 6,000 copies today. And he said, Nabeel, if we didn't have any one of those copies, we have in our possession over 10,000 Latin, Coptic, and Syriac translations of the early Greek New Testament manuscripts. And he said, if we didn't have any of those translations, we have over 30,000 quotations of the New Testament from the early church fathers with which we can reconstruct virtually the entire New Testament many times over again. Nabeel, we know with certainty the message of the original New Testament. And I looked at him and I said, David, you're making this up. I said, I've talked to dozens of Christians. No one have told me this before. He said, you think I'm making this up? I said, yeah, I think you're making this up. He said, well, then you better bring it. I'm like, it's been brought, let's go. And so from that point on, David and I start arguing about these things, but we do it in a pursuit of truth.
If this story moved you, hit subscribe and click the notification bell so you don't miss our next truth-filled, life-impacting upload. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear that truth is worth everything, and tell us in the comment box what one truth you have held on to despite the cost. God bless you.